sharing my.
There we go.
There we go. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So just give me a second to while I get that organized. And here we go. So I think there, thinking about it. There we go. That's us. So yes, so I'm Alan Ramsey from Faith and Community Scotland, and I'll just introduce myself very quickly and give you a very brief rundown about Faith and Community Scotland. I do recognise a couple of faces from other conversations that I've had through the Net Zero roadshows, so good for people to come back, and for those that are new, I hope you get something out of the day. And just to amplify what Jack said about questions, absolutely, questions are always in order in these sorts of events. I'd rather that people asked than sat there thinking that they didn't know what was, they didn't understand something or were unsure about something I was saying. So please do. Probably easier to put it into the chat, and if Jack or one of the staff team will probably flag it up to me if there's anything, because um, I wouldn't be able to keep as close an eye in the chat as otherwise would. Okay, so just to go on, so Faith and Community Scotland, about us, we're an anti-poverty organisation at heart, and our vision is that all of Scotland's communities being places of welcome, justice and sharing, and are places where everyone can live their lives to the full. Um, we offer we work alongside faith communities, and we offer quite a lot. You're here obviously today to learn about funding and look at options around that, but we offer much more there. And I won't read everything that's on the screen there. I'll let you read that, and it's been recorded, so if you miss anything, you can go back and look at it. But that's basically our um, reason for being and things that we do. And over the last year or so, coming on for a year, we've been working with the Net Zero team around the road shows that have been going on in the different dioceses, and supporting some of the work that's been done towards net zero around as local congregations work towards their kind of net zero plans in terms of the funding and other support that we can provide. So there's our kind of contact info there. And just let's move on. So there we go. So into the meat of the presentation. So we're going to look at three main areas today over the 2 hours that we're together. We will have a wee bit of group work. So the relevant point, Jack will send you into groups. And for those that remember um, being on Zoom during the last sort of 5 or 6 years, that thing where you join a group and you push away and then you come back. Well, you'll be reliving those moments. A couple of points. So we'll be looking at project planning, because really that is one of the key aspects of funding. Actually, the getting of money is almost like the very last step for when it comes to fundraising. Almost a lot of it rests absolutely on planning and project development. We're going to look at specifically how you plan your fundraising with a net zero perspective. We'll talk a bit about that specific area, because there is perhaps funding streams are different for environmental or climate change related improvements that you might want to make to your buildings or projects related to that. And then we'll look at successful applications in terms of what might make a successful application. There'll be a couple of points, and I'll put up examples of worksheets or tables, things like that, that might be useful tools. These, don't worry about copying them all down. Those will all be sent out after the session. Okay, so we've done our introduction, but I suppose if anybody actually would like to just say where what it is you'd actually specifically like to learn today. Because as I say, we will have some opportunity for sort of question and answer back and forth, and it would be really helpful for me to hear if there's anything that people are particularly interested in. If you could just actually take yourself off mute and say what that is. And it's okay if you don't have something, or if somebody says what you're already interested in, you don't need to repeat that. But if there is anything that anybody would really like to, has got a burning question about, please ask, because we might be able to directly address that in the session, or feeling that we could have another conversation. We could arrange one to look at your specific issue. We'd be happy to do that. So if anyone would like to just see why they're here.
Well, I'm here to see about other sources of funding suitable for our charges.
Okay.
I get lots of questions, and specifically an issue that's come up in the last week is funders from outside the church not understanding what the Canon 35 process is and how that impacts on the project and the timings.
Okay. Sure, that might be a bit of specific sort of technical knowledge that might have to pass over to somebody that's more au fait with what that actually is. But I'm quite happy to talk around, how once I've had that explained to me, how that might impact funders, or how you can talk to them about that. Okay, thanks, Susie. That's really great. Anybody else? Colin, saw your hand going up. Oh, you're on mute, Colin.
I'll unmute myself. I'm from Holy Cross in Davidson's Mines, Edinburgh, the treasurer. We are planning to do refurbishment, particularly to our hall. I'm interested in the timetable and order of events in planning, applications, trying to get funding, doing the work, and just how you do a timetable for all that.
Okay, that's a really great question as well. Thanks, Colin. We'll definitely look at that later on. Thank you. Okay, so Susie and Colin have come in within. Is anybody else get anything else that you'd like to specifically address?
How you get everybody on board in these complex processes if you've got an old and difficult church, especially if you're in a church where you've been ahead of the game and you've tried stuff before, and to be honest, it hasn't worked well. How do you that can be really problematic.
Okay, that's really interesting. That's almost a foundational kind of question about how do you bring people with you in terms of okay. We'll definitely look at that as well. I kind of really like that sort of stuff, and actually going back a slide or two when we talked about facilitation on the things that Faith and Community Scotland offers, sometimes that sort of group development, bringing people together for a common purpose, helping people share a vision that they might have from a small group or one or two people into a wider kind of group of leadership, or indeed the whole congregation, is perhaps something that we're definitely quite familiar with. So it's a really good question as well, and could probably actually have a whole 2-hour workshop on its own thing. But we'll definitely come back to that. So thank you very much. I saw another hand waving. Emmanuel, I think. Yes.
Hi there, everybody.
Hi there.
I'm from Perth. I'm from Perth Cathedral. I'd like to learn an overall experience of climate change, including specifically information on how to access funding and to work together towards net zero.
Okay. So I'm not a climate change expert, but I believe that there'll be that knowledge will be within the net zero team, and certainly we can look at perhaps how you might work if we're in small groups, how you might talk to each other about working together as a sort of local network or something. I suppose that might work. That's thank you for raising that. Yeah, and we definitely will look at how the funding for these sorts of net zero projects will work. So that's definitely. Oh, I've got Alison Campbell. You've raised your hand. Very technical there. Can see that.
I work, well, I don't work. I'm a volunteer for a Larder, which is a charity, but
Mhm.
not faith charity. And I'm also a treasurer for the church. It's much easier to grant bids for the Larder because it's quite straightforward. And I'm trying to understand which grants are specifically available for faith communities because
Mm.
it's a different selection.
It can be, certainly, yes. That is something that we will look at and we'll talk about in more detail. So thank you for raising that as well. That's really helpful. And in fact, that might be a good way. I'm just going to move slide. There we go. So we're going to talk about communicating your ideas. And sorry, I'm just moving there we go. That's it. Communicating your ideas or your projects, your project ideas. Have you got everything in place that you might need, including some of those tools that I was talking about, planning tools, checklists? We're going to look at funding terminology, and also actually, I think going to go slightly off piece here, so I'm just going to check my time. Okay, yeah, I've got time that we can talk about that. So just picking up there on what you were saying about it's easier to fund the larder than it is to fund the church. That can definitely be the case, because when you consider the church from as a missional entity, there are lots of funders that won't fund the active promotion of religion. However, they will fund the good work that you do in your community because you're a group of religious people. You're members of the Episcopal Church, and you've got a lot of congregations are very deeply involved in issues around social justice and supporting their communities. Actually, Faith and Community Scotland, we're based right next door to an Episcopal congregation in the north of Glasgow that is hugely involved in its community and is a real place. So I know how passionate people can be about that. So what I would say is that if you go in with a please fund the church to do church stuff, that is all. You really do need to find and target very specific funders that will be quite okay with that sort of thing, and they do exist. You might find it more fruitful to perhaps, if we're thinking about building improvements or things like that, that if you are hosting community spaces or community activities within your halls or other spaces that you have available, then the question about whether do we need to do this refurbishment, this net zero work, in the context of actually being a community space. And you will find that you could go to the same funder and ask them the same question, but from two different directions. And one way they would give you a no because, oh, we're not going to fund your church, but oh, we'd be quite happy to consider funding your space where you you do your community work, because it needs to be wind and watertight. It needs to be a sustainable building. So having environmental mitigations like solar panels or battery storage or things like that are equally valid and sort of useful for that. And then that also gives you the benefit of a good space for the life of the church life of the if you understand if you get my point. So that, again, you need to think about how you approach funders, how those applications are written. But I've seen many churches get funding for halls, even their sanctuaries, because they're used by people in the community, and the funders who would be normally quite reticent and not even reticent, very unlikely to fund religious activity will quite happily fund the stuff that goes around those community activities to make them more to make those spaces better, more accessible, more efficient, etc. So, okay. I don't know, Alison, if you want to jump in and say if you feel that that might answer your question. We can come back to it.
The only issue we have in the church is that it's quite small. So we would actually have to carve part of the back of the church off to make a community space.
Okay.
Is that likely to be funded?
That probably would be, actually, yeah. There's I've seen that, actually. It's in Oban Church. I can't remember the name of it, but the Episcopal Church in Oban, which I've been in for a couple of events, and I believe the Net Zero event that also took place there has been converted in a very sympathetic, very practical way that I believe has multiple sources of funding in it, and other communities as well that I'm aware of. In Glenrothes, we did some work with one of the Episcopal churches there, Father Jerry, and he, very involved, a lot of developments around about the building and stuff. So yes, there are live examples of that sort of stuff happening. So again, if you want to approach me directly, because obviously every situation is very much an individual case. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation about that. So I'll put that. I'll put my email. You'll have my email address by the end of the session. So I'd be really happy for you to approach me about that. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, just checking time again. There we go. That wasn't too long. I can go off in tangents like the best of them. So that was quite short by my standards. Okay, but I think it's really worthwhile to actually say that sooner rather than later, though, because sometimes we do have this perception that wider society isn't interested in funding people like you to do the things that you're doing, when actually a lot of the time that is open to your funding your activities and developments as they would be anybody else. It's just about finding the right funders and making sure you meet the criteria and stuff, which is, sometimes harder than it could be, but it's all possible. So just to recap this slide, because I've talked quite a bit. So communicating your ideas and projects, making sure you've got everything you might need in place to for your project, which the chap from Davidson's Mains, that's I think that's the question that might be of interest to him. And then also when you come to looking at doing funding applications, terminology and all the sort of jargony stuff, because sometimes it can feel like a whole other language. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So fundamentally, communicating about what you want to do is it's a multi-purpose skill, really. If you're good at communicating generally, then you can be good at communicating about a project. And if you have people around you, because I recognise that you are here as individuals connected to different congregations across Scotland, but no one person is likely to have all the skills that they need that might be useful. So if there are people around you that are quite they're good storytellers, they're quite dynamic, and there's the opportunity to go and speak to funders, and maybe there's local funding surgeries and things. Sending somebody that knows what you want to do and can share it in a really effective way is a very important way to just get your foot in the door with funders, and also just the wider community as well, because oftentimes there'll be situations where you might want wider support from the community, whether that's because you're launching new activities and you want to involve them, or if you're making changes to a building that's prominent and people have lots of opinions about what church people should do with church buildings, even when they're not actually in the church. That's people that are good communicators are worth their weight in gold for all sorts of reasons. So project communication, having good ideas, really, really important. Lots of people have good ideas. Your idea might not necessarily be absolutely the best idea, but if you're taking it to a funder and they have to pick between however many 100 or dozens of applications or whatever they get in for a fund, having a good idea that you've actually been able to prove, you've actually been able to sell the idea and also your organization. So if you've worked with funding before, if you've worked with projects, if you've worked with partners, then maybe the kind of officials like councils or NHS, things like that. If you've got people that you can name check, as it were, organizations that basically highlight your bona fides, basically, that show that would be a good bet for this funding. And also, lastly, that you've actually approached the right funder, because some funders will fund all sorts of things. Others are very, very specific. And if you fit a very specific funder's criteria, then there's a really good chance that you will get the funding from them. If you approach them and you're well out, then you won't. I mean, that seems very obvious, but honestly, when you're reading funding bulletins about funders and you think, oh, this sounds amazing, I could really get, and then if you, the number of times that I've even personally read something and gone, oh, that sounds great, and I've almost gone to share it with a colleague or my line manager about, here's a great idea, a great funder that we could use to support us, and then actually something makes me go back and read it, and it's like, oh, we don't meet this one bullet point that my brain glazed over when I was looking down the list. So it's very easily done. And also, one of the advantages of working in groups is that rather than as individuals, is that you can check your homework and stuff. So that's important. Okay. So we talk about what I think is an American business term, the elevator pitch, the idea being you get in a lift with somebody and you've got a very short space of time to chat to them about what it is you want to do. And in this case, we're over a coffee rather than actually in the lift. So what I would say is that if you get the opportunity to talk to a funder, what you need to consider is like maybe 2 or 3 key points about your project you want to do. So such as what it is, it's very clear, why you're doing it and why it's important. And just to say that, yes, we're speaking as people that are connected to the church, and therefore, why are you doing it? It might be because your faith motivates you to do it. And I think that is a really important and a motivator for people, but depending on the funder you're talking to, you might want to pick another reason why it's important. Or why why it's important, why you're doing it. So yes. So I wonder, Jack, would you be able to put? Actually, no, we won't go into groups at this point. I'm just wondering, does anyone have a specific project idea in mind that maybe they'd like to practice that with? Anybody? Sorry, I'm just. Sorry, I can't see anybody at the moment, so that's there we go. I've managed to minimize. Okay, yeah. So,
Alison's raised her hand.
Yep. So Alison, yeah.
Right. Well, it's a tiny church with a tiny kitchen, a tiny toilet, and the church itself isn't big, but our heating bills are enormous. And in fact, we've had to move out into the community centre over the winter because we just can't get it warm enough. So what we want to do is make it have solar panels, efficient lighting, and better heating. but we also want to carve off part of the back of the church, make it into a meeting room with storage above it, and doors that open through, so if we have weddings or funerals or whatever, people can get through, and a panel going across that's perspex. So if there's a large funeral, people at the back can still see. Then that's as far as we've got, really.
Okay.
We've got quotes, but it's to know quite what to do with it then.
So I would maybe have quite, if we were batting back and forth ideas about this, I would maybe be asking you or pointing, so it's the heating bills, over the winter, has been one of the things that I really kind of latched onto, because I know how difficult that can be when you're in that sort of situation. So you're talking about, you're really amplifying, I think, at first port of call, your sustainability is really about that, your kind of long-term sustainability, or maybe.
And also to make it available as a community asset. We would like, particularly the men's, that there is Andy's men's shed, which we would love to have had at the back of our church, but it's just not possible. It wouldn't have been warm enough for them. So that kind of opportunity to give something back to the community, and to make the building leaks like a sieve in all places, so it needs to be sustainable for the planet as well as for us.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So yes, that a sustainability angle, but given back to the community. Yeah, it sounds like you're really on the right lines here. So, and then actually what I would maybe say is that, in reference to the group that couldn't use the space because it was too cold, say some almost like, you might want to go out, do like a wee survey. People have told us they would like to use our space. Our space isn't isn't functional at the moment because it's too cold or damp or whatever. And actually bring in some, you mentioned the word quotes. You were obviously meaning quotes from builders, I would expect, but actually quotes from local people that you've been engaging with. And then once you got that info, just sort of sit with it, see how it sort of comes together. I suppose one of the things to say actually is that you might be able to fund different elements from different funders. So almost having like if you've got flashcards with different words and different things you want to get into an application, and sometimes all of those things might be in there, but other times you'll be taking out other ones because they're not relevant to those funders, but the broad kind of strokes of the project would be the same. So that was good. I see Janet's got her hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So Colin and I are from the same charge.
Yes.
We have a plan to redevelop our hall, which is a substantial space with toilets, kitchen, very well used through the week by very many different community groups. But it's in a state where it's beginning to, it's single glazed, the roof needs attention, the kitchen's not fit for purpose, there's just, a huge number of things. So it's really the plan. Please jump in, Colin, if you want to. But the plan is to redevelop the hall to make it, first of all, net zero, improve aspects of, like, put insulation, solar panels, all of that. So that's, yeah. Colin, do you want to say anything?
Oh. Sorry, I don't know where you said you were from, but do you have any diocesan resources? Do you have a diocesan architect, for instance, who could help you scope out exactly what you need? It seems to me that you've got to go back to square one and you've got to decide exactly what you need to do. Yeah. If do you have quinquennial inspections? Has that report highlighted what the issues are with the damp and what you might do about them? So there are things, I think I would say, that before you actually get quotes or anything like that, you need to have done all of that and to scope the whole project. And again, I think, as the gentleman Alan said, that you might want to do bits and pieces. and that you might get actually different funding from different places. I mean, we're quite lucky in Ayrshire in that the wind farms provide funding for a lot of the community spaces. So we got new lighting in our hall, which was funded by the wind farms grants. So there's a lot to do before you actually, I think, get to the detail of it. You need to go back and see which of the various parts. Also, I think it's an awful lot easier if you only do little small parts of it, because it can seem very overwhelming if you've got to do everything.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Colin, were you going? Thanks for that, Susie. Were you going to come in, Colin, with?
It was really just to support Janet and what she was saying. We're from the same church. We have a clear but not detailed idea of what our work that we're wanting to do is. But it was interesting to hear that we perhaps need a diocesan architect to help us scope the work in the first place. Is that anything that the Net Zero team help with as well? Because a lot of what we're planning is to put solar panels, insulation, double glazing in, all of which should, I think, command grants for that.
Yeah,
I
I don't
think
know.
we need leading in some ways.
I don't know if Neil, you want to come in on that, as I believe you're from an Edinburgh church there, Colin. But as Neil, Neil's got his mic off. I'll let you take that then, Neil.
Hi, Colin. Yes, as I said, I look after the Edinburgh Diocese. I believe my colleague Daniel may have visited previously. There's plenty of provincial funding, guidance. We're here to help you do all of those things. So yeah, please do reach out. The Net Zero team can help you with all of that, particularly the funding. And there's things like solar panels absolutely covered by provincial funding, all the way down to your insulation, that kind of thing. So yeah, we are here to help. You just need to reach out.
I'm based in Edinburgh myself, so I'd be happy to perhaps arrange a visit to come and have a meeting with you to discuss this and create a plan detailed of what would be most appropriate for your building.
I live in Perth, so Jack and Bethany are a better place to visit. But yeah, we certainly can help you bring all of that together and make it a successful project.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's really good to know.
Yeah, thank you. And just to say that, yeah, if you're thinking about projects, that sort of project development, if there's a specific piece of work that goes along with a new building project, then by all means get in touch with us at Faith and Community Scotland as well, because we can perhaps give some advice or support around about the actual sort of on the ground work. I did see a wee message from Bethany flashing up there saying that reminding us that not all dioceses have a diocesan architect, so it might be worth checking out whether your local diocese does, or whether that's an official role or somebody that buildings officer or some other role along those lines within your local diocese structure. Because yes, they will definitely be a useful source of information about all the building regs and stuff like that will go alongside anything that's like especially external work to churches. And obviously the more ornate or listed your building is, the more challenging it can be, but not impossible to work with. So yeah, great. Sure. So I'm just going to go back to
Adrian has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I missed that, Adrian. Please go ahead. I'm just going to stop screen sharing for now. There we go.
You are on.
There we are.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it. Thanks. Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment on sort of the process. I'm on the Diocesan Building Committee in Fife, and I'm an architect. In terms of the process, I would say find someone, whether it's an architect or a surveyor with some building knowledge. And usually you'll find someone on your diocesan building committee who'll do it. They'll not draw you a scheme for nothing, but you can ring up and ask them for some advice. And quite often the likes of me will exist in every committee, and they're quite happy to have a chat with you or maybe come out for a visit. But I would say in the first instance, you want to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. Because quite often people will come along and saying, right, I want the room 6 by 5 and I want it to have solar panels and blah, blah, blah. It's so much more useful if you come along and say, these are the issues, this is what we want to resolve. And it might be our electricity bill's too high, or our gas bill's too high, or we want to achieve net zero in our building, or it might be we're struggling to get people through the door and there are accessibility issues, or we don't want the congregation to leave. We want to have somewhere that they're, can have coffee or whatever afterwards. But if rather than presenting a solution, you can come along with, this is our problem, and this is what we'd really like to achieve, that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
And then I would say the next thing you need to work out is how much money you need to achieve that. And it mightn't need much more from an architect than just a freehand sketch initially, who would probably produce you different ideas. You could do this, that, or the other. And then it's a matter of getting a budget on it. And you might find idea A costs you 50,000 and idea B costs you 200,000. And it might be worth the 200,000 for idea B, but until you get a handle on that, it's very hard to go forward. And it's very hard to apply for grants until you know how much money you're looking for as well. So I would say that's the starting point. And only when you've done that basis do you want to employ someone to start doing formal drawings and schemes for you, because you can eat money very quickly.
Well, that's really helpful, Adrian, especially your reflection about coming with the issue rather than the solution already in your head. I think is actually a really good thing to consider and to take forward with you, because so often we do have immediately, especially if you're solutions focused, people can very quickly come up with an idea that addresses their issues, but is it the right one? And so actually having a conversation with an external party like an architect or somebody else that can perhaps you can bounce ideas off around in a without putting too much of a frame of reference around it. I think it's a really good reflection. Thank you for that, Adrian. Great. Does anyone else get anything that they want to kind of jump in with just now? We're doing actually pretty well for time, so I'm pleased. It's been a long time since I've done one of these online, so I wasn't sure how we would find it, but we'll have a break in about a wee 5-minute break in about 20 minutes. Okay. So we've got a question in the chat there. Emmanuel is saying, where's that gone? It's right down here. There we go. We have a huge space to heat at Perth Cathedral, gas cooker in the kitchen, the boiler. It's not up to me, but I know some of the problems that exist. Yes, I was in Perth in the cathedral for the last of these roadshows, which was at the end of January, I think, having been rescheduled because of one of the storms at the back end of last year. And Bethany did say in her email that we should wrap up warm, and I was all ready to go. I had loads of layers and I left them all in the car, and my wife drove off with the car to go and visit her parents who live in Perth. And I was like, so I was quite chilly for a good chunk of that day. And it was very cool. And there are, I think, challenges when you have a space that is as big as that and is also as old, in the sense of, like, it's quite a grand building. There are challenges. There were some people that offer innovative heating solutions for churches, and Jack and Bethany have their details, but they were a couple of the roadshows that I was at, and it sounded really interesting. Some of the technology seems to have really moved on in terms of infrared heating and different options that might be available, and that are also very sympathetic to the surroundings as well, rather than slapping like giant, space heaters around the walls or something. So, which just wouldn't be a goer at all. And yeah, I'm just seeing a couple of people coming in and saying that yes, our church is the same, and I think it's unfortunately certainly with older buildings it's a challenge, but also even more modern buildings as well. Like we used to be based in a concrete built building in centre, and it was a very big spaces as well, because you can do amazing things with concrete, but it was terribly cold in the winter. So very glad that we're now in a former rectory, which is much more like a house, and therefore actually much easier to keep me and my colleagues warm. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the presentation, and let's see, where's it gone? There it is. Yeah, so here we go. It's thinking about it. There. So that's where we were, but the elevator pitch and ideas, and thank you so much for that really good bit of discussion. One of the great things about doing these sorts of sessions is there's so much learning or knowledge that's in the room that actually participants can learn from, rather than just listening to me all the time. Because I know a lot about a lot of things, but I'm not an expert, and there's many areas where there are people in the room that can actually cover those things. So it's great that expertise is able to be shared. Okay, so so this about project planning here is actually quite relevant, I think, to what we were just talking about. So people often say we've got a really good idea, we want to be sure it'll work well, and we want to spend a lot of time together as a group planning our project has made a big difference to its success. Those two statements are really key examples of groups that worked really hard to do put in the project planning work and actually get good outcomes in terms of applying for funding. And I will say that this bit about we spent a lot of time together actually can be quite a lot of time, especially if you have a large application that you're putting in, that can be quite large or quite time consuming. Did I see something coming into the chat there? Okay, let's just close that. So what funders might say is if we think it won't work, we won't waste our money on it. And also that poor project planning is one of the most common reasons we reject applications, and that I've heard that from different funding staff at different funding organisations. They are very conscious of the even really large funders like the Lottery or Robertson's Trust, and that have got millions and millions, potentially hundreds of millions available for different schemes. They look after the pennies. They won't waste their money on things that they think is not going to work. And that's just the reality of it. So time spent in preparation is really important. Okay, let's move slides. There we go. So I'm just going to bring up another one of the planning tools that I mentioned. Some of you, I think Susie might have seen this already if she has been into, I think she was in the session that I did in Glasgow, Paisley. So, but I'm just going to share this one. Screen shared again, and so there we go. So this is a 2-page document. And it is just a Word document. It's nothing fancy, but I will email it out to you. But it's quite useful. So it's firstly about organisation. It's a project planning checklist. And first page is about questions about your organisation. So the name of your organisation, that would typically be your your church congregation. Although if you have a spin-off bit of work related to that, like or another piece like a pantry or something like that, it might be that. So then asking for, do you have a clear idea about what you need to do? So mission statement can be really good about that. And then you've got that. So, and also to say, it says that it's quite, it's in 2 columns. So I have this already, or I need to get it. And I'll come back to why those 2 questions are there. So I'll just very slowly go down through it so you can see it. So how long your organisation's been in existence for, and then if there's anything in particular that you might be known for, or achievements. There we go. So your constitutional form can be really important. So I know that Church of Scotland congregations have, if they haven't updated their constitution in more recent years, often have a document which literally goes back to the ending of the Great Disruption, so like the 1929 Church of Scotland Act, and they are a constituted organisation and they are charities because they're all known by OSCR, but actually, does anyone know where our copy of our constitution is? And actually, it's very rare that people do. So that might be something to consider. For your church. Are you a charity? Yes. So your charity details, all that stuff. Some organisations are also companies limited by guarantee, or a Scottish charitably incorporated organisation, which is a form of legal protection for charitable trustees that is less onerous than becoming a company limited by guarantee, because you still only report to OSCR rather than Companies House as well. So if you aren't one of those, what kind of organisation are you? Constituted group, housing association, unincorporated association, etc. What are your governance structures like? Do you employ staff, and how many? What's the management board like? Volunteers, how many do you have? Often funders are really keen to see how many people you have volunteering in your organisation. And thinking about churches, you could have an argument that anyone that's got an active role within the congregation would become a volunteer, really. So I think it's whatever makes most sense to you and that you can morally claim as well, about who might be a volunteer, but it's useful. So have you got policies for safeguarding, all that sort of stuff? And the answer is yes, you should. And if you don't, I'm just going to tell you now, you really need to go out and get them. So what projects what are you already doing? How's that funded? And it's okay to say that you self-fund things, or that you do really small things because you don't have a lot of funds. That's okay. And that never mind this checklist, that's always appropriate to say. What about your organisational capacity? So how does that connect with what you're already doing? Whose responsibility for taking it forward? And you might also want to say at this point about if you're working with any community, like partner organisations. So if there is a diocesan architect, they would actually be beyond your local congregation. So you're also being actively supported by the diocese, or if there's a third sector organisation that you're connecting with, either as a direct charity or perhaps like an umbrella organisation in your local area. So in Glasgow, we have a Glasgow Centre for the voluntary sector, Glasgow Council for the voluntary sector, GCVS. So they provide a lot of support to charities. And every local authority will have one of those. So I think in Edinburgh, it might be EVOC. I think that rings a bell for me. There's other, they're very easily found if you don't know who they are. And it's also worth saying that actually, signing up to being in these all these organisations will produce mailing lists. So if you're not signed up to being on them, getting onto them, and because they often have funding that's really local, which can be really helpful for you, because rather than me going, well, I need to ask you all these questions about where you are and all what the local area is like, they know that already. So that's great. Okay, so moving on to the second page of this. So this is similar questions, but it's about the project, so not about the organisation. So whether that is, you want to fund a community activity or project like a pantry or something, or whether it's, we want to fund the building redevelopment. So that's so these questions will be around that, and yeah, having a name is good. It's not always necessary, but sometimes funders will ask you for that, and then it appears on the grant award and stuff like that. So, so having a name that's good is good, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's probably one of the minimal things. So talking about outcomes, what do you want to, these outcomes will describe what you will change. That's basically what will be different as a result of your project. And then the next set of boxes are why it's needed. And then how will you make it happen? What's the plan? The sort of stuff that I think Colin is perhaps kind of interested in. So there might be things happening in different phases. There might be different organisations that you need to bring in at different points depending on what needs to happen, especially with a building project. You're not going to get your painters and decorators in when you've still to go and rip the walls down so you can put in new pipes for radiators or something like that. Or wiring. I suppose we're moving away from I suppose from gas. Sorry, that's terrible. It's just so that sort of step process. What difference will it make? How we know when you're getting it right? Who you ask? What we ask and who we ask of. So basically, doing very light community research, talking to people in the community, really, really important. And people are. Once you get people talking, they always tell you what they think, whether you want to hear it or whether it's useful to you or not. And then looking at budget. So how much will it cost? You'll see a three-word phrase there, full cost recovery, which which is something that's for those that aren't familiar, that's basically looking at absolutely all of your costs. And again, sitting there with a group of people and chatting about what things are actually costing, because so often you'll submit a budget and then somebody goes, have you got a budget line for this? And you go, oh, we didn't think about that. And so getting that information in early is, or in the process before you finally click submit is good. So one of the great things about this tool that I find is that if you can go in down each of these columns, and if in most columns you're in I have already got, and then if it's if need to get, or if you know where you can get it, that's really important, because sometimes with the best will in the world we find out about funding opportunities with very little time sometimes to respond, and obviously you're not going to be able to turn around a £300,000 building project around in a couple of days. That's just not feasible. But for more kind of modest amounts of money, there might come a point where you go, I've just got enough time to do this if only I had all the information. And if you've got that to hand, if it's Thursday afternoon and the application's due on Monday, and you know that you're actually free on Friday and you could tackle it or between there and over the weekend, then you would be able to, if you've got that sort of info, then having that to hand stand you in really good stead for those moments when you quickly need to put in an application. And sometimes that can be because, unfortunately, maybe a crisis has happened, like, you've come into church on the Sunday and a tree's come through your roof, or something bad has happened that you're going to need some additional funding to help you address. Then the quicker you can get some of these things dealt with, the better. So Okay, great. I'm going to stop sharing that. And yeah, great. I think we're actually coming to 2 o'clock, so I think now is probably a good point for a wee 5-minute break. If folks want to stretch your legs, come and maybe grab a quick cup or something, and just see you back here at 2:05. Okay, great. See you in a couple of minutes. And every time I've ever done one of these workshops and shared that, there's always at least one person that they just get this like gleam in their eye because and actually I did a small group with the United Reformed Church and session, and the result she was just opposite the table, and I could actually see her filling it out in the session as she was going. So that was
I kept trying to end of it, she up and down it.
Yeah, so that's very So these things are quite simple, but hopefully quite impactful. And for people that have a lot of experience or whatever, you might find there'll be other things that work for you. And I'm not suggesting that you need to start using our stuff or anything like that. It's just for those that are new to this whole thing, then it can be very useful having a few wee tools that help. So I'm really glad to get that bit of feedback there. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'll just fire up the screen share again, and we will just wait. From a different slide because I was flicking through to see what was coming up. Right, so there we go. We've seen that one. There we go. There we go. So we're going to look now at terminology, what you might call jargon. The thing to say right from the get-go is every funder uses sometimes even the same words differently. They've all got their own way of describing what it is they do, how they want to hear about what you do. So it's really important to say that when approach each new funding application afresh every time, or with a different funder, and even if you have applied to a funder previously, make sure they haven't changed, and because every 3 or 5 years they might have or 10 years they have strategy refresh, and usually as part of that they will change their language that they use. So, but generally speaking, so the organization, that's the legal identity of the organization, of the grant recipient organization. A project is a specific piece of work that you're seeking funding for, whether that is activities based, so lunch club, something like that, or whether it's a building project. An aim is usually a very succinct summary of what the project is about. I think one of the reasons why we say this 30-word bit here is because funders have definitely moved to being more limiting in what you can tell them. So they might have word or character limits on their forms. In each box, will have have a limit. So you need to sharpen up sometimes, and it can be difficult because I think in paragraphs rather than bullet points sometimes. So that's something that I struggle with. Whereas one of my colleagues is really, really good at just thinning stuff down and getting the essence in there. Outcomes, mentioned that briefly already, but that's primarily the difference that you hope to make. Outputs, sometimes people hear those as interchangeable words, and out and society, yes, that's the case. But when we're talking about funding, outputs, generally speaking, are the particular services that you aim to deliver. And then targets are both the quantity and quality of outputs. It used to be that for many years, funders were they just wanted pure numbers, so they wanted to know that you had your community pantry fed 300 people or whatever. But latterly, now there's much more interest in the actual kind of what you might call the human element. So what is the impact, or the impact that your work has? What is the quality of your outputs? So and some things are easier to give quantifiable information. It's really easy to say, we had X number of visitors in the building. It can sometimes be harder to say what the quality of that is, what the outcome. Spending a bit of time thinking about how you answer those questions, that can sometimes make the difference between success or failure. And also, you often get asked these questions if you've got funding which is for a defined period, say like a multi-year funding. There'll be a midpoint or maybe an annual point where they come back and ask you for a review of how you've been doing. And actually having that qualitative information at that point can be really, really important, really useful, and would absolutely, commend that to you. Yeah. So there we go. Do we want to do a wee group exercise? How do we feel about that? We've got time. It would really only be 5 or 6 minutes, I think, but we could perhaps go into thinking about an application mode. If I was doing this as a full day course, we would have quite a lot of time to spend on this sort of stuff. We don't really have that time to spend, but if you just want to unmute and come in and say if you'd like to do that or not, that's okay. What do we think?
I
Okay.
think that sounds good. Yeah.
You think it sounds good?
Yep.
Yeah. How many
Okay,
groups
great.
do you want to make?
So what have we got? We've got about 15 people, don't we, Jack? So
Yeah.
shall we do maybe 3 groups?
Cool.
And yeah. So the idea is that you're part of a community group concerned about isolation amongst older people in the area. You've done your homework and want to set up a lunch club in response. Using the 6 points below, prepare an outline summary for the Robinsons Trust. So we won't actually have a whole lot of time to sit and actually write things out, but if you were to think about your key messages in your small group, so what you might say in terms, actually, if you focus on your outcomes, so what is the key difference and the outputs, I think that's really clear. And then if there are any targets that you've got time. So yeah.
Great, I'll do that now. So how long will that be? 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes. We'll come and get you. It's about 5 minutes, yeah.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Invitations have just gone to everyone.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I'll maybe join group 3 just
Okay.
because there's only a couple of people in there. So
Susie, you will have gotten an invitation to join a group. I can see if I can physically move you if need be. Oh, there she goes.
welcome back, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm not going to spend too long debriefing that, but if anyone's got anything that they'd like to share about what you talked about in your groups, just very quickly, just and it's okay if you don't.
PVG. That's
PVGs.
one of the ladies in our group brought that
Mhm.
up. That's quite a tedious process. You know, you've got to
Yeah, it
make
certainly
sure you
can
do
be.
all of that as well
Mhm.
as the
Yeah.
obvious things.
Yeah, if people don't already have a PVG, then I think they are taking quite a while at the moment, like everything seems to be. Yeah, and I've heard like months, taking to come back. So that's something to very much consider. How practical things are until you get a PVG, if you decide that's what's needed. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's really useful. Thank you for that. I hope you enjoyed having a wee bit of group time. And yeah, let's go back into the presentation. You'll be glad to hear we're definitely getting through it. So okay, right. Right. So this is next slide is just looking at, we're going to look at this very quickly in terms of, there we go, why applications succeed and why they don't. And I think it's always really interesting that we talk about failure first. I don't know if it's the Caledonian cringe or whatever, but it's sometimes easier to talk about that. But yeah, so basically these are really straightforward, but I'll just go through them really quickly. So you're not eligible, for whatever reason you don't meet the criteria, you won't get the funding, and no amount of appealing or wailing or gnashing of teeth will make a difference. Missing the deadline, again, sometimes there's a wee bit of flexibility with that. Like if the deadline is Friday at midnight and the admin person wouldn't be picking up their emails until Monday at 9, then if you pre-warned your targeted funder and said we're running a bit late, would it be okay to submit it over the weekend? Sometimes you will find that is okay. Other times that's just a no, and it's a very easy way for a funder just to take your name off the list and not have to worry about processing your application. Incomplete or illegible, in the old days when we used to do things with pen and paper, legibility was a major issue. Now it's less of a thing. You're all here today on a device, so you've probably got the ability to do an application on a computer or similar. But completeness is important. If some applications, especially like online forms, are now set up that you can't proceed until you literally tick all the boxes and do what you need to do, so that's good. And if there is information that you don't have, then it basically forces you to go away and find that. You've failed to demonstrate that you meet the criteria for whatever reason. You've not. It's really easy sometimes because your setting, your scenario, your situation, that we sometimes forget to be really explicit about particular things. So what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, and demonstrate really clearly why you meet the criteria. Poor project planning. We've obviously been talking about that. I wouldn't belabor the point again. You've not been really clear or not presented the project clearly or concisely. There's questions about monitoring and evaluation processes. One of the things that funders are really careful about, especially these days, is just trying to avoid funding black holes, where they don't know where the money might actually end up going to, or if that phrase throwing good money after bad. And one of the ways that they can get a check of that is how robust your evaluation or monitoring sort of processes are. And I know lots of you won't have them, but you will be you will have accounts that will be audited or examined, and so there are ways that you can use even basic things that you already do to talk about that in a way that just makes that clear, because especially larger sums of money, there's often quite detailed stuff in applications about monitoring and evaluation. Unconvincing or problematic budgets. Funders will have they might not have seen your exact application before, but they will have seen very similar ones. They might even have seen similar ones from your local area. So they will have a whole body of work that lets them gauge how realistic a budget is. And actually, I mean this in the sense of like, don't under apply. If you need £50,000 and that's part of the offering of that fund, apply for the 50. Don't go, oh, we'll go for 35 or 40 because they'll give it to us. Sometimes there is an argument to be made for, not going and asking for like the full amount from one funder or whatever, but that don't ever try and like hide what your actual budget is, because you will end up getting found out. Asking for too much, similarly, yeah, that's basically the flip of the other one. Especially at the moment, funders' resources are really pushed. So if you try and pad a budget line to try and get a bit of money, they'll just look at it and they'll probably be able to know. And knowing some of the people I know that work for funding organisations, they can tell these things. And so don't do that. And then documentation, proper supporting documents, that checklist that we were looking at before, the whole point of that is to help you identify the kinds of documents that you need to making sure that you've got them. And again, sometimes you can't even submit an application these days without having all the things that supporting documents that you may need or that they want to see, rather. Sorry. So, okay. But the good news is, the reason why you might be successful is because you've proven that you're the best placed organisation, you've targeted and chosen the most appropriate funder, you've done a bit of research about the funder, so you know the sorts of things that they like to fund, maybe things that when they're putting out their publicity stuff, you've maybe reflecting some of that back to them. That can be a really good way to show that you're paying attention. You've submitted a deadline. You've managed to develop an amiable working relationship with the funder. That can be sometimes easier said than done, because smaller organisations don't often have lots of staff, so you're less likely to meet them, to be able to engage with them. Some actively say, please submit your application, but you wouldn't otherwise hear from us unless you're successful or not. So there's no opportunity to develop a relationship. But if you can, especially organisations like excuse me, the lottery, who have got place-based workers, staff that cover specific areas, they've each got a patch. You can get in touch with those people and actually start developing a bit of a relationship with them, asking them what they think, because they also give advice. So that's really useful if you can do that. Something that makes you stand out against other applications. What is it about your building or your project that means it's going to have an impact on the funder that's going to make them go, oh yeah, that's really good. There might be that you're working with a range of organisations, particularly interested in partnership with organisations that might not normally have applying to them, and they think, oh, that's really good. That's the sort of work we want to support. It might be something significant about the heritage of your building. One of the things that came up when we were doing this before was, like, if you've got a cemetery or a graveyard at your church, who's buried there? There might be like some famous person or somebody that's got a bit of a name that could that you could use as a bit of leverage, and that just makes it interesting. Accurate budgets, and maybe even you manage to get match funding from either another funder, your own resources, or perhaps through the structures of the church. There might be stuff available that you could get in hand, and then that give it, even if it's modest amounts of money, it can still show that you're trying and you're not just relying on this one funder. Realistic amounts that you've asked for, good governance and management procedures, so that evaluation and all that stuff that we're talking about before. And the last one is a bit like, how do you get a job that needs experience if you don't have experience? I do understand that, but if you've ever handled any funding before, now, even if it's just like a really small grant of like a couple £100 from local council for a community event or something, anything that you can do that shows that you're able to manage other people's money well will be appreciated by your funder, and that goes doubly for when the stakes get higher and there's more money involved. So, and thinking about just on that, it's probably a good point to say that if you are approaching the lottery, Heritage Lottery is slightly different, but if you're approaching the lottery for any sort of project-related funding, they always ask you to. There's nothing that legally says you can't apply for whatever funding stream that they have, but if you haven't already got a relationship with them through going for the smaller pots of money, Awards for All, which at the moment is like £20,000 for a year for, and it can be multi-year. Then they're not really going to consider you seriously for a bigger ask until you've jumped through a couple of the smaller hoops to begin with. So that's these successes and failure criteria. I'll share that in the email that goes out afterwards, so you don't need to worry about copying all them down. I should have said that before. So we're going to look at where you can find funding, then thinking about ethics, research and funders, and then a bit more thinking about budgets and full cost recovery. I mentioned full cost recovery before. So does anyone want to just, let's see how we're doing for time. Yeah. So I think, in a larger group setting, we might spend a bit of time looking at this. But in terms of raising funds, you have the, so there's your obviously statutory grants. There's all the different ways that you could fundraise in your community, like events, stuff like that. There's now things like crowdfunding. When I first started in my role, which is about 10 years ago now, crowdfunding was just sort of coming in, but it wasn't really a thing, and now it seems to be everywhere. If you can particularly get people interested in what you're doing, and the community round about you isn't massively impoverished, that can be a useful source of funds as well. So lots of ways that you can raise funds. Trusts, mentioned a few of them already, and then obviously there's one. So for instance, just to really mention actually the purpose of today, the Benefact Trust would be particularly useful, I think, for lots of you, because they do funding around buildings, and I think they also support the Episcopal Church in Scotland as well, I think. So there we go. So there's a quick look at some specific ones. Trading can be a good thing. Like if you've got a cafe, already, or the ability to do that sort of thing, sometimes that can be useful funds. One of the great things about money that you can raise yourself locally is that it's what we would call unrestricted funds. So if people put donations in, or you're buying selling cups of tea and cakes and stuff, or any kind of event like that, that is just money that you can use for whatever purpose. Whereas money from a grant or a statutory source is usually ring-fenced for a particular purpose, and we need both. Sponsorship can be interesting, especially if you're thinking about building improvements. There's sometimes ways that you can have a tie-up with a company, but that's got yeah, the like conditions attached literally, and you might not want to do that, which is fine, but you can make your own local decisions. So here are some really good websites. Funding Scotland, so www.funding.scot. That's run by the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations. They've got a really good portal. If we had longer in the day together and the session together, we would perhaps actually look at some grants that you could find or how it works. But it's really easy. Funds Online is run by the Directorate of Social Change. Again, it's quite good, and Grants Online as well. We'll say that to get full access to all the information with these sites, you do. They basically run on a subscription model. Funding Scotland is actually free if your organisation's income is under 100,000, and if it's more than that, I think the next level is something like it's like £200 a year or something to join. Which gives you a whole other loads of other benefits as well, because you'd be joining the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, so legal advice and stuff. So it's up to you whether you decide that's worth it. I will say that you can actually get lots of information from Funding Scotland without needing to do that. And actually, one of the ways that you could do it is it will give you names of funders and all sorts of information, which you can then open up another tab in your browser, go to Google or another search engine, put that in, and then find out about the funder directly. So that's potentially something quite useful to consider. Yes, I think I've said everything I want to say, but yeah, I've said. But yeah, and I will say Funding Scotland is really good to play around with, because you can have all sorts of different ways of sort of selecting what you're interested in. It's quite a robust tool, so it's well worth playing about with if you like that sort of thing, or know somebody who does. There we go. So ethics of funding, I'm not going to spend too long about this, but I think these are questions that we might want to, that you should ask yourself sometimes, depending who the funders are. So right at the top there, we're talking about net zero. Would you accept funds from an organisation whose activities damage the environment? You could, you might say that. Why would you do that when we're trying to net zero? Sometimes these organisations are very, very wealthy from the products of their dealings. So, yeah, likewise, organisations that from organisations' activities have a negative impact in society. Such as perhaps gambling, and also things like alcohol sales, production. I will say that it's not always totally upfront about that. So, like the lottery I've mentioned a couple of times, they're obviously funded through the various national lottery games that they have, and I've actually worked for a church that had a major issue about working with that sort of stuff. Yes, and also the Robertsons Trust, who we mentioned in the context of your lunch club for older people. They're an interesting one because their money comes from the whisky industry, but they were specifically set up by the family to basically as a remedial thing, because they recognised the damage that had been done through that, and it was 3 sisters, I think, that set it up, and they were all very proper abstainers, and had nothing to do with alcohol apart from that was where their wealth came from. So there's a kind of both sides argument there, which takes us to the next slide, which is a quote from the founder of the Salvation Army. I shall take all the money I can get, and I shall wash it clean with the grateful tears of widows and orphans. And I think that's just speaking to what I was saying there about actually, I think when it comes to applying for funding, there's often compromises, from a church perspective. We live perhaps in a fallen world, and therefore, what can we do to perhaps address things, and where can you get sources of money? And it's a fact of life that one of the biggest funders, for instance, is like the National Lottery related stuff. So yeah. Okay. So we're going to move. Does anyone, just before we move on, have any quick questions or thoughts? I think I saw the chat box flashing up. So just see what we have there. Oh yeah, Jack put some. Neil and Jack have put some comments in, and yeah, charity excellence as well. Thank you, Alison. I hadn't thought to put that in. I'll update the slide. Yep, SCVO, very useful. That's great that you're already familiar with some of these. So it's so somebody can't see the slides. Sorry about that. Let's hopefully. That's interesting. Can I just confirm? Can everybody see the slides?
Yep.
Yes, fine.
Okay.
And you're going to send us the slides? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will. So, okay. So, right. Let's just do a quick time check. So we've got 15 minutes. So I will probably, I think, yeah, we'll move on to the next bit, and I'll very quickly show you an example of a planning table. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Hopefully, for those who couldn't see the slides, you'll be able to see them when we come back in. Okay, so okay, right, here we go. Sorry, I just actually forgot to press the share button. I know what I'm doing. Right. So this is just a really simple table, just with a bit of income plan. So, for instance, we've got the name of the funder, Glasgow Community Planning Partnership, a community inclusion project, £50,000 a year for 3 years, started in 2024. It finishes in October 27. When is it paid? It's quarterly basis via bank transfer. Oh, it's April 2011. Why is that there? Because this used to be an ancient old thing. That's and I updated it, but obviously missed that. So there we go. I'm the lead team person, so I'm responsible for that for our organisation. The lead funder person is somebody by the name of J Blogs, and then reports are due every 6 months in June and December. So this is an example of one that you might, when you already have funding, but equally when you're thinking about what it is you need to cost out, and what needs paid for, having even prospective funders on a list, especially when you're thinking about. So, for instance, you might have in the additional cost, you might have the year started and final payment stuff blank because you don't know what that is. But you might have in the additional comments box, you might use that to say the application date is, and we expect, and then maybe even an additional column you can add to that about when we expect to hear, because often funders will say, applications close then, and we expect to make decisions by such and such a point. So that can let you see how things are working out. And I will say, actually, sometimes one of the questions that often comes up is about double funding or double applying. So if you have a situation where when you're starting out, you're looking for funding, it's perfectly appropriate to apply to several funders at the same time for the same basically piece of work, because you don't know whether one or indeed any of them are going to come back to you and say yes. So it's like if you were looking for a job, you didn't have one, you would naturally be applying for perhaps several jobs at a time. It's exactly the same. sort of a situation, and it's perfectly valid to do that. And sometimes funders will ask if you've applied to other people, and as long as you say yes, we've applied to X, Y, and Z as well as you for this, that's fine. There is sometimes then a happy a situation that you sometimes get where if you're wildly successful and you end up with more money than you hope to get, then that perhaps gives you other options. I would always encourage you to just to chat to your funders about that if that does happen. To say, because and they probably won't actually take it back. What they might say is, well, we'll hold on to it until year 2, and you can get it then. Or they might say, take the money, but you said you were going to do, you were working quite small, you use it as an opportunity to expand your work. So something like that. So, and again, these sorts of tools can help you see where you might have gaps. So this, like the final payment column, if you've lots of things finishing up in October 27 and not much finishing in, February or March or something in 2028, then you're like, where's that 6 months worth of funding coming from? And if you know you've got a 3-year period, ideally having a kind of staggered funding cocktail that basically covers for any that. I mean, that's a perfect situation, but it's doesn't always work out like that, and I recognise that. So, having reserves and stuff is ideal if you have them, and if you don't, well, just sometimes it can be a bit sketchier. Okay. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Can everybody see that? Have we gone back to the one that says strategy worksheet? Is that okay?
No,
I think so.
we're still seeing an income plan.
Oh, you're still seeing the income plan. Okay, that's great. So what I'll do is thank you for telling me that. So I will stop sharing that and go back to the presentation. That's brilliant. There we go. Teamwork makes it all happen. So right, great. Okay, so when we're budgeting, making a list of all costs as accurately as you can. If you've got multiple projects, they need their own budgets, and taking account of rising costs. For much of the time that I've been doing this work, inflation was so insignificant that it barely even counted. You might have like annual pay increments or whatever for staff, but almost year to year there would be no change in most of your figures. Now that's obviously quite different. So checking that you are taking into account for that is really important. So don't guess, get some buy-in from your board or your governance structure about that. So it's not just you that's kind of responsible for it. Make sure you keep notes on how you arrived at costs in case there's any questions. I've personally been in situations where that's not happened, and then you're like, how did we get to that number? And it just drives you nuts 6 months later, trying to figure out. Decide what the rate of inflation that you're using is, and see what be clear about that. Full cost recovery, your hidden costs, things like insurance, any maintenance costs or other overheads, make sure those are included. Recruitment can cost if you're employing staff or even advertising for volunteers. And then evaluation, it's usually appropriate to put in a bit about a budget line for evaluation. So going back to some of the things I said earlier on about successful applications, don't underestimate your budget to make you look lean. That's just going to cause you problems. Don't overestimate, don't be too greedy, because funders won't like that. But also, you apply for what you need as closely as you can. If a funder doesn't want to pay for core costs, it's very likely that if you hide a contribution to core costs, then they're basically going to blacklist you. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't do that. If you're submitting a business plan or some other document alongside the application itself, make sure the sets of figures in each are matching, and then check and double check that it all adds up, because sometimes it doesn't. Usually budget tables and stuff will be done on a spreadsheet, so it often it should do the maths for you, but still you got to double check that it's right. Okay, I think we're kind of pushing ahead a wee bit. Yeah, we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to move past that. There we go. So come back next time for the lunch club. So full cross recovery, we've got this image of an iceberg, because I think it's 70% or 80% of an iceberg is below the surface. So the idea is that what you see is actually only a very small part of what makes a project tick. So there are all these costs that you need to consider, the invisible costs, and trying to catch them as much, get a sense of what they are. And once you've got them, that's great, because they tend not to shift around unless there's like specific changes which you should then be aware of. So like if you're moved to some sort of, like in the old days when you used to buy a computer package and you would just have it, and now it's like subscriptions for Microsoft and stuff. Those are the examples of like changes that can happen that that can impact on the costs that you might not think about. Okay, so I don't think I need to say too much more about that. What does success look like? This happy little boy on the beach. Get the basics right. It's amazing how much of a positive impact having the basic stuff correct can have on an application. Funders often come from a background of working in the same sort of spheres as you might have been involved in, so they know roughly what's what. So just even basic information, making sure that's correct is important. Right amount of detail. If you've got an application form that says we'd like 500 words or 1,000 words or whatever about this question, and you put in 100 words, is that sufficient? Really think about the amount of detail. Giving them correct information is really important. It's always easier to change a form before you send it in rather than having to contact them after if you realise there's been a mistake. So really try and get the right information first time. Be passionate. I think it's really important. One of the great things about people who are committed to what it is they're doing is that they're passionate, and actually that can come through in an application and make the difference. So you've got effective governance, sound planning, realistic budgets, robust monitoring, evaluation, credibility. That's really important. It's one of those kind of more ephemeral things, but I think everything that you do when you're in contact with a funder builds your credibility. So even if you don't have experience of applying or receiving grants, if you come across as serious people doing serious work, I think that speaks a lot to your credibility, and also in the relationship with the funder. So okay, so what funders? And if you're not successful the first time, try and get feedback if possible. It's not always possible. Some funders say that they won't give a feedback. Many do. So if you're successful, funders like to be kept in touch with progress. There'll be processes that you'll have to follow in terms of reporting, but actually, if you're doing events, things like that, the bit at the bottom there, it says, remember, funders are people. They're often people who are like you, and if you're doing events, things like that, they want to come along. If even if they can't come, they like to be invited, so that's always nice. Especially if you're talking about nice new buildings, facilities that you've buildings that you've renovated, etc. That's a really good opportunity for them. If you get any problems, let them know. Hear about longer term progress, because that can actually be a really good thing. If you're thinking about future years going back to a funder, keeping in touch, just send them a copy of any annual reports that you might produce, or if there's anything particularly newsworthy, invite them along to events, annual general meetings, etc. So, okay. Oh, yeah, so there we go. So that's kind of the end of the presentation. I realised there was a couple of things flashing up in the text box, in the chat, sorry.
I think it was mostly just that a good amount of people have had to jump off now.
Aha, I see that, yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. So obviously something else is happening just now. So I'm going to stop sharing just now, so I can see everybody again. And yeah. So does anyone have any questions before we just finish up? Yep, okay. I see a hand up there.
It's David.
Hi, David.
You didn't mention VAT, and I wondered about what's happening with the listed places of worship scheme going forward. You used to be able to get 25,000 back on a spend of over 125k, but I think this month, March, it's changing. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So what has happened is that because it's VAT, that's a UK government thing, and the UK government have decided that they aren't going to do that anymore, but they're going to do a grant fund. But that's only England and Wales at the moment. When we were in Perth, we were hearing from John Swinney, who I think it was kind of news to him as well. But so there may be some additional funding coming to the Scottish Government to mitigate that. But at this point in time, I don't really have much more information than that. But it's one of those things that I think there's been a decision taken that maybe the consequences haven't quite been thought all the way through in terms. And it obviously is a source of concern, I think, for people in listed buildings.
So it could add a lot to your
potentially could, yes.
You can't claim the 25k a year or spread that over a number of years for a big
really
building.
Sorry. I hate to be the bearer of kind of bad news, but that's just...
And I've just got one other question quickly. Neil had put the thing in about many of the grant funders expect some financial input from yourselves. So if you have got some investments and they perhaps want to know about your funding in terms of what you have in terms of portfolio of investment, is there a rule of thumb you should sort of look at, say, hypothetically, in terms of what you should sort of spend in terms of your own savings against a major project?
No, I wouldn't say so. One of the things that I think is maybe coming in a slightly different direction is thinking about funds that might be restricted or designated. If you've got a lot of unrestricted funds available, then yes, I think using that as money up front, in the context of applying for other grants, maybe saying this is our match funding. Like we can invest in the building to this level. We need additional beyond that to help. Is a good way to go. But in terms of like actual investments and stuff like that, I think that's, they might occasionally have a question about that, but I don't think there's any kind of specific rule of thumb about that. Yeah, just I'm a trustee of a very small grant making trust, and one of the things that we sometimes wonder about is if an organisation that's got a lot of funds that are unrestricted comes to us and says, "Can we have £500?" or like, could you not just have paid that yourself? But sometimes there are reasons why funds are restricted or not able to be used in particular ways, and that's when having a chat with a funding officer comes into play, because you can say, this is where we're coming from, can you help us work around that? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. I've got a quick question for you before you go. If I put a link to a feedback form in the chat, would you be able to fill that out for me? There we go. It's just a really quick form. So
I can share it as well with everyone.
I'll send it over to you, Jack, so that you can share it
when
as
I circulate the slides.
And the slides as well. Yep. So got the link copied there. Just making sure I don't send something inadvertent, try and break the system. Okay, so here we go. Right, that's the link there. So that'll be live from now on. So if you could just click it and then at your leisure fill that out, that'd be brilliant. Right. Yeah. So any further questions just before we finish up? No. Well, thank you.
I'll make sure that I include your contact information as well when I circulate that to everyone.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, please. Oh, yes, I was going to put that in the chat as well, wasn't I? So I'll just do that just now for those that are still here. So, there we go. faithandcommunity.scot. There we go. So, and yes, just to flag up that I'm an Alan with 2 L's. So if you're emailing me, make sure you get that second L, or I won't get it. So that's correct. Yeah, what I put there. I'm just suddenly worried I might read a typo or something. So, okay.
Great. Okay. I think probably all that's left there is to do now is to thank everyone for coming that's still here, and thank you, Alan, for your time this afternoon. I really hope that people found that useful and feel a bit more confident and empowered to move forward with procuring funding, hopefully for their net zero projects, but also for whatever operations they might have going on at their church they might want funding for.
Yep. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, please do. We'd be very happy to have a conversation. So
great. Thank you very much, Alan.
No, thank you.
Okay. I'll circulate the slides and recording when I get them. So probably tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.